Well, that's the nature of a complex sale, is that there's lots of moving parts. And you might even have part of the organization that doesn't want to change at all. So the date means nothing to that person because they'd prefer that there be no date. And so the nature of it, when it's really complex and there's a lot of players, right? I think the latest CEB says it's 6.8 now, right? So we're looking at 7 people that we got to get all rowing in the same direction. Well, that can be challenging. But the truth is, and this is tough for anybody who's listened to this who's never done it, you'd like to believe you could throw them all in a conference room and sell them all together. And occasionally you can get some good mileage that way. But the truth is, you got to sell every single one of those people.
Hey y'all, welcome to Selling with Social, the podcast that helps marketers increase marketing qualified leads, sales reps to shatter sales results, and sales leaders to grow as leaders. Each show, we interview sales, marketing, and social media practitioners, leaders, and influencers to help you connect, close more deals, build stronger relationships with clients, and improve your sales productivity. I'm Mario Martinez Jr. You're now listening to Selling with Social. Today's guest is James Muir. James is a professional sales trainer, speaker, and coach. He is the best-selling author of The Perfect Close. In this book and on today's podcast, he'll discuss the secret to closing sales. He'll discuss a very clear and simple approach to increasing the rate of closed opportunities and accelerating sales to the highest levels while remaining genuinely authentic. Those interested in learning a method of closing that is zero pressure, involves just 2 simple questions, and is successful 95% of the time, can certainly reach out to James at puremuir.com, puremuir.com, and listen in to this podcast right now. James Muir, the man. I am so excited that you are joining us on this podcast today. I am super pumped to have you, my friend. I have been reading your book, The Perfect Close. Saw I published something on LinkedIn. I couldn't put it down. I'm pumped. Man, thanks for being here with me.
Hey, it's great to be on your show.
You're a man of many talents, author, speaker, coach, vice president. What don't you do?
Well, I'm a musician too. How about that? We'll throw that on the pile.
Okay. So there is something else that you do. How do you find the time, my friend? That's a lot.
Yeah, I wish I had more time for music, actually.
Gotcha. Well, listen, excited to have you here with us and our audience. The folks that are joining us are sales and marketers, and we're here to learn. So tell us a little bit something about yourself. How did you end up in sales? I know that you've got an interesting story here that you didn't start out in sales. So tell me how you ended up here.
Yeah, I'm an accidental salesperson. So I started out as an operations person in a family-owned revenue cycle management business, and I would often help the sales reps out in the field when they would get hit with technical questions. And then we acquired a business in another area, another region, and we needed an operations person who could also sell. And so I just got drafted for that. So I'm basically this technical person in sales, and you can only imagine what that was like. And it was so anal retentive. I created this grandiose schematic that had all this process on it. And
the bubble chart.
Yeah, I was just brave enough to give this to people, said, look, this is what you're going to do, and this is what I'm going to do. And anyway, obviously it went over like a lead balloon most of the time, but that's how process oriented I was, because that's the whole world that I came from.
So you're saying that the engineer operations person actually does have the opportunity to get into sales then?
Yeah, in fact, Andy Paul and I kind of agree on this. When it's a really complex sale where the product is ultra complex, I think it might be better to actually hire a person that has the technical skill that takes years to create and then teach them how to sell, as opposed to go for the natural born salesperson. So I wouldn't hold to that 100%, but I strongly feel that way. But I'm biased, right? I'm that technical guy that came in. So I know that I can be taught, because when I first got into it, I knew nothing about it, right? I used to think, oh Lord, I hope I never have to do that. That's what I would think when I would see the salespeople doing that, and here that's what I do every day.
Well, based upon your personality, based upon the conversations that we've had and all the things you're doing, honestly, I just can't put you in that category of ops or sales engineer, or you are, to me, the sales guy at heart. But I will tell you, in my own personal practice as a former VP of sales, I really, really always focused in on trying to find that talent that could go both ways.
Right.
The ability to be able to be technical at the same time that had those innate sales skills and closing skills that are needed inside a salesperson, but also someone that can build relationships, personal, right? So I do agree with you. I don't necessarily know if I'd go all for one direction or the other, but definitely that guy right in the middle is a sweet spot.
No, you want the whole package. And there's a message in there for the listeners, which is whatever industry you're in addition to being an expert at sales, you need to be an expert at your domain, at the industry that you're in, because if you've got both of the packages, you are a valuable commodity out there, both for customers and your employer.
No doubt. In fact, many sales leaders, which I don't necessarily agree with in totality, but many sales leaders, when they're looking for new hires, they always want someone with that industry domain experience and can sell. I particularly look for the guy or gal that is killing it in any domain because I can teach them the domain. But you're right. I mean, it makes yourself more valuable for sure.
Well, I think the key there is that they're teachable. Either way, whether you're teaching a domain expert how to sell or whether you're teaching, a salesperson the domain, you're looking for a teachable person. So when I do interviews, I'm going to ask a person what the last book was that they read or the last half a dozen books that they read, because that's going to tell me whether or not this person's in growth mode or not. And the best people are always learning something new.
Gotcha. I love that. I probably would fail your book test because I'm not the book reader, but I am the blog reader. I'm an avid blog reader and listener to podcasts and videos. I love consuming content that way. But
that counts in my book.
Okay. All right. I was say either way, as long as you're growing, I think that's the message here. Grow. Make sure you grow. You have written the book, The Perfect Close. Like I said earlier, I started reading this. I couldn't put my hands off of it. I'm continuing going through it. And I'm like, yeah, this is great. This is great. This is exactly what I have believed in and taught. You put pen to paper. So tell me a little bit about why did you write the book, The Perfect Close, and who does it specifically help?
Okay. Well, as you know, what's in the book is I'm declaring it the best practice for sales closing. I know that's bold, but that's what I believe.
I love it. Be bold.
Yep. It's just 2 questions. It's no pressure and it's 95% effective. So the reason that I created it is I personally suffered a little bit from the challenge of not knowing what to do to close. Yeah. In my background, I would just keep going and going and going and make the customer stop me. So I would basically have the customer close me, which is not good actually. And I can give you some bad examples of that. But what I saw out there when I started training salespeople as a VP is that there were domain experts or entrepreneurs, people that don't typically have to sell, but they get put in these sales situations and they're uncomfortable at this moment where they need to ask for some kind of a commitment. They just don't know what to say. And I can tell you, having observed a million meetings, what happens is they actually don't say anything. Instead of asking the wrong way, they don't ask anything. And so the book was meant to create a way that was a very simple, followable approach. It's not 100 different closes. It's the same close you use in every time, essentially. That's non-confrontational, that they can get behind, because most of these folks would confess to me they hated selling. That was the part of the job they hated the most. And so we explain to them, first of all, that selling is service. You're just helping the other person. Then we can get them off that, selling is evil type thing. And then we give them a way that's comfortable, that basically works all the time, and just to create momentum until the sale's closed. I found it very effective. So that's the reason the book got written.
Awesome. To our listeners, you're going to love this book, and it's simple. It's easy to read. And the best practice, like the stories that you were telling inside here, we'll get to this one. But the story I love about the sales rep who was the end of quarter, you had a deal and you told him to go ask the buyer if we can move this deal along if we did something special. And he totally changed the whole dynamics of the question. Like that to me, I was like, oh my God, I get it. That's exactly what has happened to me before in the past. So I'm going to come back to that one.
Okay.
You start out in the book talking about some of the myths of closing. What are some of the traps that salespeople fall into when it comes to closing sales opportunities? Let's start with that.
There's a bunch. We cover 7 in the book, and then you can get a report from the website that has these same 7 in it. But I would have to say the biggest one is this: always be closing. That's the thing that you hear bantered all over the internet. And the sad thing is that past the first attempt, there's actually a negative correlation between closing attempts and closing success. So people that are ultra aggressive and constantly with the customer trying to close, what they're doing is they're actually reducing their chance of closing the sale. And Huthwaite actually even measured that in their study. And so we have a number on it. It's actually 33% less effective to keep asking over and over again. So you don't want to do that. But thanks to, Alec Baldwin and Glenn Ross, everywhere over the internet, we all know that always be closing is the right solution. So I think professionals at some point in their career, they learn that actually doesn't work. That's probably the biggest one. There's several more. The one that I fell for is that the sale will close itself. Right? There's a huge proponent of people out there that think that the sale will just close itself. So statistically, the problem of not asking for any commitment at all is actually very much bigger than the problem of asking in the wrong way. In 50 to 90% of all sales interactions, there's no commitment asked for in any way whatsoever. And so that's, again, one of the needs I was trying to address was, no, there's a way to do this so that it doesn't feel bad. If you go peel back the onion and look at why aren't people asking, it's because they're uncomfortable. They either don't know a way to ask, or they feel like they're manipulating the customer, because most of the techniques out there that are being taught are manipulative. Those are probably the two big ones, I would guess.
Yeah, when it comes to selling, I think there's this idea that you ask the prospect, so, when do you want to make this happen, or when are you trying to have this deal done? And all of a sudden you hear someone say, first quarter of 2017 as an example. And then all of a sudden everybody's like, all right, we're closing this first quarter of 2017. But from my experience, one of the key questions that I've utilized in training my sales organizations, and what we utilize even today, is what happens if you move past the first quarter of 2017,
right?
So that you could understand like this impending event that may or may not be there if the deal doesn't close, or if they don't have a solution in place, right?
Well, yeah. What's the driver, right? So we asked that question. Okay, well, let's just say that July 1st comes by and this doesn't happen. What happens then?
Yeah.
And then you're going to hear a really compelling reason. Oh, we go off maintenance and they shut us down, and so we'll be dead if that happens. All right, we love that. That's a hard, solid. We can forecast this accurately now.
Right.
But other times they'll say things like, for us, we're in healthcare. They'll say, oh, well, the doctors are going on vacation. That would be convenient. Yeah. That's a bad driver for the date that they gave us, right? It's going to slip because it's just not compelling enough. We need a strong business reason for them to switch, something that has a little pain to it if it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so you and I are on the same page for that.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think the concept of closing is always make sure that we understand that business challenge, that business problem, and what the impact will be if they don't meet the timeline. And then secondarily, tell me what you think about this, is the buyer that you're speaking to may say, well, this might happen, or this is the deadline that I've been given. The next question is who do you report to, assuming that you don't know that? But how do they feel about if this doesn't get finished by that certain time, right? So that you understand, like, are all parties on the same page here?
Well, that's the nature of a complex sale, is that there's lots of moving parts. And you might even have part of the organization that doesn't want to change at all. So the date means nothing to that person because they'd prefer that there be no date. And so the nature of it, when it's really complex and there's a lot of players, right? I think the latest CEB says it's 6.8 now, right?
Yeah,
so
we're
looking at 7 people that we got to get all rowing in the same direction. Well, that can be challenging. But the truth is, and this is tough for anybody who's listened to this who's never done it, you'd like to believe you could throw them all in a conference room and sell them all together. You'd like to believe that. And occasionally you can get some good mileage that way. But the truth is, you got to sell every single one of those people and know what what's the win for that person, and then craft a solution and approach to solving the problem that addresses every one of them. If that sounds tedious, well, it is. But if you want to sell multi-million-dollar deals, complex solutions like that, it's the work that has to be done.
And let me caveat that, not only if you want to sell that, but if you want to make the multi-million-dollar checks.
Exactly right.
That's why sales is one of the highest paid professions, because you got to go through that tedious process and the methodical step, which, by the way, the perfect close takes you through a very simplistic, methodical step. And I really appreciated this about the book. There are 2 questions that you talk about that are related to the perfect close. What are those 2 questions? And this was really very, very simple, not too complex, but the process behind this and the methodology and the thought process you wrapped around this in the book is quite impressive. So talk to us a little bit about the 2 questions.
Okay. Yeah. Let me ask you, when you read it, did you go, oh, of course?
Right? Well, yeah, kind of. like, oh, this made sense. Okay.
Yeah, okay. That's usually when people go like, oh, it's so simple. So before I give you the first example, there are 5 variations of that, right? And I think you want to ask about later maybe the something special variation, because that's the one with the recording that we talked about.
Okay.
So before I tell you the just basic one, the first kind of kindergarten version is, it's important to think about before you go into any interaction with a customer, you want to have a few outcomes in mind. What do you want to happen here, right? And so you should have at the least an ideal advance, what we think is the best outcome. And then you want a couple alternative outcomes that you're going for, or advances, using Neil Rackham's language, just in case your ideal advance isn't going to happen this time. We can still keep the deal moving forward. And all that takes is just a little bit of planning, right, by doing that. But if we do that, right, we've got our ideal advance ready and a couple alternatives, well, then it's really easy to do this with zero pressure and a high probability of success. Okay, so with that backdrop, the first question is, does it make sense for us to X? Okay, so when X is whatever your ideal advance is. So maybe an example of that might be, does it make sense for us to schedule an assessment to see what our best options are? Okay, in that example, the assessment's the ideal advance. There's only two things that they can respond with. They're going to say yes, or they're going to say no. And if they say yes, great. We got our ideal advance. We're off to the races. Let's get our calendars out and schedule it. On the other hand, if they say no, well, then we're just going to ask the second question. This is where there's some variation. There's some upgrades to this version. But the basic version is we would just throw it back to them. Okay, well, what do you think is a good next step then? And I've been in so many calls with so many reps, I can tell you what happens in 90% of the cases is the customer suggests a step that is appropriate for them right now. Right? In 90% of cases, they're going to just suggest what the next best step is for them. Yeah. So what that does, though, is it paces our advancing the sale at a rate that's ready for the customer. It's when we use a closing approach that tries to move the customer faster than they're ready for, that's when it starts to feel like manipulation to a customer. And so doing it this way paces it at exactly the way that they're ready for, and in a non-confrontational way. I think maybe the nuance you were just referring to a minute ago is, let's just drill down for a minute. What are we really asking here? We're not asking anything. We're not asking a close or anything. We're asking a timing question. Does it make sense? It's not, will you buy or will you do this? Right. It's, does it make sense to do this right now? And if the answer is no, well, then they haven't said, I'm never going to do that. They're just saying the timing's not right. Yeah. Well, once you know that, then you realize you're throwing it out there. But the beauty of it, though, is that you're telegraphing in a very strong way that's what you want to do next, right? If I say, hey, does it make sense for us to do an assessment, then they know. If they say yes, well, then okay, the next thing I'm going to say is, well, let's schedule the assessment then, right? So in that way, we're able to pace it at exactly the way the customer is ready for it. And a couple of the other variations let us either fall back, right, to one of those other alternative advances. If they say no, well, other customers at this stage sometimes do this. Does it make sense to do that? Or we can move it forward. If they say yes, we could also say, well, other clients at this stage sometimes also do this other thing. Do we want to do that? I had one account that we did in Sierra Vista where we went in looking for a demo, and we were demoing the wrong people. And so what we wanted to do was present to the right people. And so that was our ideal advance, was just to present to the right people. But we still had a couple of alternatives. One was to get some conversion information. Another one was to get some technical people, their technical people, to talk to our technical people. And we get in there and we get to the point where we've showed the demo. We go, hey, well, does it make sense for us to schedule this for the other group of people? And he goes, yes, that's a great idea. I go, okay, well, check. We got the first one, right? So we went for the other clients at this stage will sometimes give us the conversion data. Does it make sense for you to get us a conversion? He goes, yes, absolutely. Right. All right. Well, let's go for broke here. The third one was, and sometimes it makes sense for us to have our technical teams talk together. Does it make sense for us to schedule that? He says, yes. And so I'm out of gas. I'm spent. I've done everything that I got on my list. And so you end that particular one with, is there any other things that we should be looking at right now? And here's what this guy says. This guy says, well, our legal team is kind of slow. Is there any chance we could get a copy of your agreement so they could look it over? And I'm like, unbelievable, right? I would have never dreamed.
Music. That was music.
Yeah, in a million years that I could have given this guy a copy of our contract. And if I had put that down as my ideal advance and asked it right at the get-go, he probably would have come off wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But by pacing this thing, we ended up getting 4 advances out of this deal and of course we got the deal, but the point is I had no idea where this guy was. Right. And so just asking this way allows me to either go as fast or as slow as they're ready for.
So that's a beautiful example. And I love the fact that you went into the meeting specifically with 3 questions that would help you identify how to advance the sale. Right. And you were out of gas, as you mentioned. And then you ask, is there anything else that we're not thinking of, right? That you would want us to do. And you allow the customer to be able to say, well, let's go ahead and get a copy of the contract and put it into legal and start doing a legal review. Hello. I mean, that's a winner right there. So I think for all sales folks that are listening, that was a great, great synopsis of how to advance the sale. And then ask the customer, is there anything else, right, that you may be missing? And they'll tell you, yeah, I think there's one more thing that we got to do. We've got to spend time with so-and-so, such and such. We've got to be able to circle the wagons back on this issue or that issue. And I think those are the types of things that you're looking for when you're going in and advancing and quote unquote, always be closing. Right. You're looking for those opportunities to make sure that you get the buyer's input on the next steps.
Think for a minute, Mario, how that makes the customer feel. They feel so much better because they feel like they're driving the whole thing, right? The way you ask just makes them feel like they're in control of the whole process. And that's what makes it zero pressure. Right? I mean, you're just asking, does it make sense? Does it make sense? Oh, well, is there anything else? Right? And then they're feeding you the information. So it's not, will you do this? Will you do that? That is a wholly different question than does it make sense? So we spent a little time in the book explaining why at first glance, it seems like it's no different than a regular close, but when you look at it close, it's very different.
And that kind of leads us right into this discussion we talked about, right? The story I mentioned earlier was the something special question that one of your reps had asked one of their buyers.
Sure.
And this is actually found in chapter 12 of The Perfect Close. I love this story. I got to tell you, I think it was like maybe 2 or 3 pages of the story leading up to what the rep actually said. So it was perfect because by the time I got there, I was like, oh man, I can't believe he did that. So tell us this story because this is a fantastic story about the something special that happened here.
Okay, so one variation, and we probably don't have time, but there is a reason why the something special variation exists, and that's because of us telegraphing discounts into the next quarter and just losing margin. So maybe we'll save that for another podcast.
But we can talk about that. Well, I'll go a little longer if you want because that just bugs the heck out of me.
Well, so the reason it exists is as a new rep, right? I'm working for a publicly traded company. You get the call at the end of the quarter, and they say, look, you need to
bring it all
give everybody discounts, right? We're hurting for money. We need to have revenue to show Wall Street. Yeah. And this is in the olden days. I'm older than I look. And we had a whiteboard, and that's what we were using to track all these opportunities. And so there were 10. There were exactly 10. And one of them was already very close to coming in. And so they say, go give discounts to all these guys and see if you can get them to close this quarter. So we made that offer. We said, you get this discount if you close this quarter. If you don't close this quarter, you don't get the discount. We're very solid about that. And bright-eyed, bushy-tailed James, I'm out there as a new rep. I do that, right?
Yeah.
But quarter ends, guess how many of the 10 come in? Well, you've read it. You probably know. There's only one. Yeah. The one that was already ready to go comes in, right?
Yeah.
The other 9 just weren't at that stage, right? Okay, so now here's the next question. Well, into the next quarter, some of them start ready to go, right? How many of those you think totally forgot about that discount we were willing to offer the previous?
None of them.
Zero. Every one of them wanted that.
They all want it. They all want it right now.
So, and just to kind of tie that off, luckily, our next quarter was also challenging. And so I got a second authority to give all the same discounts. So it ended well. We ended up getting 8 out of these 10. But here's the thing, is if we hadn't offered that discount, we could have brought those other ones in, those other 7 in at a higher margin, right? Yeah. Because we telegraphed that discount. So I got to scratch in my head. I'm thinking there must be some way to ask if they're ready to go without telegraphing this big discount, right? Because that affected both the company's revenue, but also affected my commission, right?
Yeah.
All right, so that's where this something special comes from, is that. And so the formula for something special, it's essentially the same thing that we've done before, but the way you ask is, does it make sense for us to see if we can do something special for you, if we can wrap it up by, and then whatever your deadline is, like the end of the quarter, right?
Yeah.
So we haven't telegraphed anything. We haven't told them what something special is. And if they say yes, then we know that it's possible for them to close this quarter, and we can get to thinking about what the concession will be. But it's a 2-stepper. It's not all in the same one, right?
Yeah.
So we could talk about concessions and stuff like that, but that's essentially the thing. Well, so I was managing a rep, and the rep comes to me and goes, this guy, it's only 5 days to the end of the quarter. And he goes, they've done everything we need to do. I think we can close this. I go, okay. And he goes, well, can I give him a discount? And I go, well, yeah, that's one of the things we could do, but why don't you do this? And I made him write down on paper verbatim what I just told you. Does it make sense to see if we can do something special for you if we can wrap it up by the end of the quarter?
Yeah.
Okay, wrote it down verbatim. He goes, well, what if he wants to know what the something special is? I said, well, there's a lot of stuff we can do, right? We can we could give him extra training, or we could give him another module, or we could give him user group passes. There's a lot of other concessions besides discounting, right? And he goes, yeah, but could we get the discount? I go, yes, we can. Discount is one of the things we can do. All right, so he goes off. I see him in the hall about 2 hours later. He's looking all dejected. And I go, well, how'd your call go? And he goes, oh, the guy got mad at me. And now I have to go back and create another proposal with a bigger discount. I'm going, man, that is not usually how that call goes.
Like, wait, what happened here?
How could that be, right? And so this is years ago before there was a law, but we were testing a system to record our people's calls, right? So I went back and I listened to this call. And literally my guy had it written verbatim, but instead of asking, does it make sense to see if we can do something special, right? He says, I can get you a bigger discount if you'll close by the end of the quarter. I'm like, man, that is exactly what we were trying to avoid. Right?
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, and the guy did get mad, but I listened to that whole call, and the guy was sold, okay? He had a board meeting on the 5th of the next month, and he knew there was no way he could get all his board members together before the 5th of the month to get this, right? And so he said to my rep, I thought this was your best and final offer, and I was going to take that to my board on the 5th. So you need to go back and give me the discount that you're planning on giving so that I can give it to my board on the 6th. And we did get the deal, but at lower margin because he telegraphed that discount. So that variation is the one that protects you, right? You can see if the deal can close. And not all of my peers out there in the sales training space would agree with me, but I really don't think that you have more than 10 or 15% control over the timing of when a deal can happen anyway, because there's so many things going on inside an organization, a prospective client organization, that even if you just do discount or even if you do other things, they still have their things inside their organization operationally that have to happen. And so sometimes if everything's ready and everything's perfectly lined up, you can use one of these concessions to accelerate a deal. But for the most part, they come in when they can. And so trying to accelerate a deal by throwing bigger and bigger discounts at a client when the problem is something totally different, if like in this example, there's a board meeting that just can't happen, well, you're just throwing money away. And so anyway, hopefully that's what you were looking for.
Yeah, that was a fantastic story. I just read an article, and I cannot remember who it was published by, but it was the title of the article was "Who's Training Who?" And it was the concept of salespeople offering discounts at the end of a quarter or a year, right, to be able to get a deal to move forward. And buyers have become accustomed to, if I just wait till the end of the quarter, or if I wait till the end of the year, I'll be able to get a better deal. So I'll just push back and wait, right? And so we could probably spend a whole nother podcast on that topic, on how my perspective on that issue in the marketplace by some of the largest Fortune 100 companies that are software companies that leverage that.
They all get sucked into it because they're publicly traded companies and they want, and in their defense, money this quarter is worth more than money the next quarter, okay? I don't disagree with that. But by doing it over and over again, we're training the customer to, and literally, the biggest health system in Arizona is one of my clients. And we have this little thing where they call me if he's got budget left over, he calls in the last 5 days and say, hey, I know you need it. I know you need it, right? So he wants to know what kind of discount, what's on sale right now. And so he's been trained. He's been trained.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? Back to the point you made earlier was in that scenario, the example that you gave with your rep, the missing piece of information that he didn't know was that there was a board meeting happening 5 days later after the end of the quarter.
Right.
And that his buyer needed to take that to the board to get this all approved.
Yep.
And so had a salesperson, this salesperson that was on your team or others that are listening right now, had we done our job to understand what was the process and the methodology that they had to go through to get things approved and the timeline that was associated with that, we may have had a different conversation. Go ahead.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I mean, it would have been different, right? Because he would have known that and he wouldn't even tried to make that attempt. Let me tell you, that is another thing about the perfect close that just makes it so perfect is that, all right, so my rep's brand new, right? And we're all inexperienced at the beginning, right? So how do I get my guy out there doing this complex sale and moving it forward, even though he haven't mastered all the things around? Well, the perfect close does a pretty good job of that. I mean, if he asks, does it make sense? And they say no, and then he asks the customer what the next best step is, the customer feeds him what the next good step is. So even if he doesn't really know what the client's process is, which he should, right? But maybe they're green, they're new, the process just kind of helps them learn on the fly. And the same thing with this something special, right? He should have known, but he didn't know. But if he'd have just asked the question the way he was supposed to, he could have dodged that whole big discount that he had to add to get his deal done the next 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, and I'll leave this subject with one other thought, and I'll get your thought on this commentary. It's almost better when reps come to leaders and they say, hey, here's the timeline, here's the impending event, here's everything. If we can do something special, can we get something special to be able to bring this deal in? And if a leader says, yes, we can, the next question, as your rep did, is ask you, well, could we give them a discount? What could we do, right? It's almost better the rep doesn't know what that something special is.
Oh, I agree that is 100% better. And what I trained my reps to do is I call it deal in hand, which is the customer prefer us over everybody else? Meaning, if regardless of the concession, let's say price and all that was a non-factor, who would they pick?
Yeah.
If they answer us, then we have deal in hand. It's ours to lose, right? Yeah. And that doesn't mean I can hit the number that they're trying to get to, but it means that we've sold them. They're sold on us. They want to do it, right? So not knowing what the concession is very good, because then you can go back to your supervisor and say, well, what can we do? And by the way, that's the way I recommend that they say, what will happen? And when you ask does it make sense for us to see if we can do something special? Very often they'll say, well, what is it? What's the something special? And you're going to act like their advocate. You're going to say, actually, I don't know, but I heard that we might be willing to make some concessions if we could get it inside of this quarter. And so rather than
something that you want, Mr. Customer.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to do. In fact, in 90%, unless I think they're going to suggest something I can't possibly do, I'm just going to ask them, what do you think? What would be valuable to you guys? And you would be stunned. Customers, I would argue, more than 50% of the time will ask for something that has nothing to do with a discount. More training, more something that is high value to them, but maybe low value to you, which makes a great concession, right?
Yeah.
So, I totally agree with you on that. That is the way to handle it. It's a two-stepper. And by the way, I asked my rep, I said, why did you ask it this other way when I had you write it down verbatim? Because I thought I was being efficient. I thought I was covering both steps at one time. So this is one of those cases where efficient is not effective. Right?
I read that in the book. Please don't go for the twofer for the sales folks. Right. No twofers here.
Don't do any twofers. Yeah, it's a two-step process.
2-for-1 process. No, go through the process as you outlined in the book, right? The 2-step questions. And I love that. So that's fantastic. As we think about the art of closing, how would you challenge others to think about this subject as a whole?
Well, you know what? Usually when I'm dealing with folks that are having a hard time closing, the biggest problem is that they think that selling is like persuasion or that it's manipulative or something like that. So I think maybe the first off is that selling is service. You're helping them. And a good way to think about that is, all right, so it's the new year. Maybe you're trying to go on a diet or you're trying to get more fit or whatever your goal is. I think everybody would like to have a coach that would help them move forward towards that goal at a pace that they're ready for. I think everyone wants that, right? And so I think the key as being the coach is to give a little thought as to what those steps are going to be. And then when we engage our clients, they're engaging us because they're trying to make some kind of positive change, right? They're expecting us to be that coach. And so they want us to guide them through that with each of these little commitments that it takes to actually achieve their goal. And so selling is really more than persuasion or manipulation. It's really about leadership. It's about coaching, right? And we're trying to lead them through this path. And most people could do a lot better job of coaching and serving clients than they're doing today, right? That would be my challenge to them is say, be a better coach, be a better problem solver, be a better teacher so you can serve your clients better.
That's fantastic advice. Really like the way you brought that out, be a problem solver, right? And that really hones in on the issues that we're trying to teach salespeople is what is the business problem that you're trying to solve in the sales process as a result of selling? So it's not focusing in on the product, but focusing on the customer's business problem that you're solving. And I think that's a very fundamental step that's missed in the selling process is understanding what problem am I truly solving.
It's huge. And you just have to switch your mindset, right? And what I would just tell reps is get off of yourself for a second. Get off the commission for a second and just be present with the customer and figure out what the problem is so we can figure out how to fix it, right? Through that creative process and them feeling your intent to actually help them out, that is going to take you way farther than any clever, persuasive mumbo jumbo that you might say.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
You do need to understand their problem. So there's some skills around understanding and helping facilitate the customer's understanding and solving of their own problems, right? And that we don't cover that in that book, but that's definitely a skill that's needed.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about the change in buyer behavior. This is a topic that we've been talking about probably for a good solid year and certainly into 2017. Buyer behavior has changed. So thinking about the change in buyer behavior over the recent years, how has that affected selling in today's selling world?
Well, I hail from the old world, so what I can tell you is from my perspective, it might be different if I was a millennial, is that the internet changed everything.
Yeah.
It used to be that we had all the info, and now the customers have the info, right? They don't need us at all. In fact, if they want to operate transactionally, they don't even need a salesperson at all. So it's critically important that every single interaction that we have with the client has to be inherently valuable. There has to be something good and valuable to the customer by our being there. It can't just be you disseminating a piece of information that they could have got, right? And that keeps the customers engaged and actually prevents this problem of going silent. Everybody in sales has had this moment where a customer goes silent at some point. And it's not in every case, but I would argue that really high percentages, like in the 80-90% range, what's happening when that happens is the customer feels they've gotten the last piece of useful information from the rep, and so there's no reason to talk to the rep anymore, right? And very often, what is that piece of information? It's the price, right? They got the final price from this. Oh, there's no reason to talk to this guy anymore. But if we're making every interaction with the customer inherently valuable in some way, then what will happen is they'll see us as a consultant, right? A facilitator. And so they'll keep coming back to you. In fact, you can even get the proposal completely wrong. They'll come back to you and they'll say, hey, this doesn't seem like it's right. Will you help me out? Because they see you as a valuable problem solver. Yeah. And we even know through science what customers want the most. What's the most valuable stuff? And Huthwaite did a study years ago. And what they determined was when we identify either an unanticipated solution, so you can solve a problem in a way that they didn't think of before, or you identified an unrecognized problem, like they have a problem but they didn't realize they had it, or there's some kind of opportunity that they were unaware of, then they're literally willing to pay a premium for your solution. The common denominator amongst all three of those things is that it is unexpected. And so when we go into each meeting, I would recommend that you take a minute and think, well, how can I add some unexpected, some surprise value to this meeting? Because that's going to make the customer's experience far better. It adds statistically a premium to your solution, but they see you differently. Every interaction with them is like we're training them what we're like, right? If they think that you're just out for yourself, then you've trained them that way. And as soon as they get the price, they're gonna dump you, right? They don't need you anymore. If on the other hand, you're adding value and you're maybe the CEB guys would just call it insight. If we're adding insight every single time that we go there, then they're going to value us inherently and they'll stay engaged with us all the way through the whole process. I like to categorize it as very simple. How am I helping?
How am I helping? How am I helping? That's it. Right? Figuring out that methodology. And it's interesting, you mentioned that about the internet, the power is in the buyer's hand, research, the ability to be able to find information. So our company last year in 2016, we rebranded over 1,237 sales professionals on LinkedIn profiles. One of the things we do is personal branding to be able to attract the modern buyer. We have 6 personal branding experts that are on my team. And one of them called me up and said, I got a problem. One of the sales reps feels like we're giving too much information about how they help the customer, and that they want to be able to take that customer and have them come to them so that they give them the information. And I said, put me on the phone with the sales rep. Now, this sales rep had this mindset, and most people who are age 40 and older, which I'm 39, I'm a few months away from 40. I grew up 19 years ago starting in software sales. We've grown up with this mentality. We kind of hold it close to the vest and give the customer the information. Get on the phone with the guy. Here is his thoughts. Exactly what I just described is what he said. And I said, let me ask you a question. What makes you think he doesn't have the information already? He was like, well, what do you mean? I said, you ever heard something called the internet? Social media, LinkedIn, your website. Everything that you have is already available either online by some third party or by your competitors. The question is do you want to give to them first? So I think that mentality of trying to hold back to be in the driver's seat, look, our buyers are in that driver's seat as a result of having access to content and information. And so what we want to do is we want to facilitate that through the process and help them and give them that information when they need it.
You're right on the money. And it's one of the places where salespeople can add value because sure, I can go on the internet and find it all, but what if I could call a sales rep that would disseminate it and distill it down into a 10-minute conversation instead of me spending 2 hours or more on over the internet? Now you've added inherent value to your meeting because you saved them a ton of time. They didn't have to go do the research and you just gave it to them, right? And that's where your guy maybe was going off the rails a little bit.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story. So I used to handle the largest Fortune global accounts accounts. And I remember one day we were in a 6-month sales process. We were actually losing the deal. This had been a long time tenure customer. We were losing the deal. And this was a Fortune 10 company. The global CIO, direct report to the CEO of a Fortune 10 company, texted me and said, can we talk? Of course we're going to talk, right? So I get on the phone with him. He says, I just need to understand. Tell me what has happened with this deal in the last 6 months that you've been working on it with the procurement team. 10-minute conversation. He says, I know exactly what we need to do. Turns out, a month and a half later, we signed a deal for a $36 million deal, right? Awesome. And so that whole concept, the buyers, they can go searching for it. They can go ask 1,000 people for the information, or they can come to one central repository that can narrow that down in just a few minutes to be able to give them what they need to know when they need to know it.
Studies by both CEB and HR Challey validate what you just said there. And that is, when the salespeople are bringing real value, actually, executives love talking to salespeople, but only when they're adding value, right? And of course, their biggest fear is the flip side of that, which is this salesperson is going to waste my time. So the advice out there for every salesperson is never go into one of these meetings without some value, and never waste their time. If you're just there to are you ready to buy yet? Don't go. You're really eroding your brand if you do that.
All right. Well, I've got 2 more questions for you. I know we've gone over time, but this has been a great conversation, James. You're killer. I love this. And hopefully the listeners are enjoying this as well. Second to last question. One piece of advice that you'd give sales leaders listening to the show right now. What is one piece of advice you'd give them?
It's probably what I just already said. Selling is serving, and intent matters more than technique. If you just go in without any of the baggage of, I got to hit my quota, just trying to help and solve the customer's problem, with that intent, you could screw up all the techniques that are in the book and other techniques, and they will still give you a chance because they can see you're trying to actually help. On the flip side, if they detect that your intent is flawed in some way, it doesn't matter how great your technique is. If they see that your intent is flawed, in most cases, the deal's off. So that's it. You're just serving the customer and get your head in the right place. Intent matters more than technique does.
Love it. That's a great piece of advice. If someone wants to connect with you, also, where can we find you? Where are you at? Are you on Twitter? Are you on LinkedIn? Email? How can we get a hold of you?
All of that. Well, so the website is puremuir.com, puremuir.com. And there's a ton of resources there. There's more than I can describe, but there's a special report on we covered 2 of the myths of closing. There's a report on the 7 myths. And then all the variations of the perfect close are there for free. You don't even have to buy the book. Just go in there and download it, and you'll see all 5 variations of it, including the something special one we talked about. And then you already know I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm very active on Twitter. So if you want to reach out that way, and actually turns out I answer my own email. So if they want to send me an email, it's just james@puremuir.com.
I love it. Great. And if they wanted to get a copy of The Perfect Close,
just go to Amazon.com, type in Perfect Close or James Muir, or even just closing sales. It'll be the number 1 thing that pops up on the search list.
I love it. I will tell you, for those of you that are listening, like I said earlier in the show, I started reading this. I couldn't take my hands off of it. It's a great read, James. You did a really, really a great job with the book. And it really comes down close to home because we're sales guys and we want to know quick tidbits of what to do, how to do it, when to do it, to be able to make ourselves better. So I love it. Great job. Thanks for joining me on the show today. And we will obviously be in touch, man. So keep up the great work.
All right. Thanks, Mario. It was great being on.
All right, buddy. You take care. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening to the Selling with Social podcast. I'm super pumped that you are our guest today. Here's what I want you to do right now. Go to jr.com/podcast and support our podcast, please, by distributing it out anywhere you can get it to on social. And don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes. You'll find all the instructions there on the site on how to subscribe to the Selling with Social podcast. Until the next show, keep on rocking. Mario Martinez Jr. out.